Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be embarking on a very special journey back in time. This is the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, also known as First Edition, rulebook. There is flavor text scattered throughout, as you might imagine, but most of it is condensed within the age of the Imperium. This section introduces the players to the age of the Imperium, the background to the Warhammer 40,000 game. Whilst the rules can be used to represent any film or book-based universe, the descriptions that follow have evolved along with the game itself. The scene is our own galaxy, a galaxy largely populated and dominated by humanity. Although humans with very different attitudes and expectations to our own. In addition to the countless masses of mankind, there are intelligent alien races. Many of these are relatively timid, easily dominated, and worthy of only a brief mention in the pages that follow. Other races are as ambitious and ruthless as humanity itself, and are also its most bitter enemies. All of these races live within our galaxy. Of extragalactic races, virtually nothing is known, for the distances between the galaxies are so vast that they have so far defeated all but the most cursory examination. The background material presented in this section of the book has been evolved during the author's games and campaigns over several years. In that time, many of the races, their worlds, civilizations, and attitudes have been worked out in considerable detail. Not least among them is humanity, and the vastness of human-controlled space known as the Imberium. Much of this information is presented here, while further material awaits publication in the form of individual game scenarios and supplements. It is for you, as games masters and players, to use this information as you see fit. There is nothing to prevent you from expanding or altering the material given. In some cases, this will be necessary if you are to derive the full benefit from the background, because, even within a single political body such as the Imperium, each planet has its own unique flora, fauna, and distinct civilization. Within the guidelines given, you will be able to devise your own worlds, placing the stamp of your own imagination upon the game. The galaxy. The galaxy contains some 400,000 million stars of various types. Of these, only a fraction are presumed to have habitable planetary systems, and only a fraction of these have ever been investigated. Most are situated within the spiral arms, between 10 and 40,000 light-years from the galactic center. The very size of the galaxy means that, despite the use of faster-than-light warp drives, most of it remains unknown. Even the human-controlled Imperium, by far the largest and most widely distributed of all stellar empires, contains only a tiny fraction of the galaxy's stars. New worlds are constantly being discovered and investigated, along with their attendant civilizations, creatures, and resources. Even so, there is no possibility of either humans or aliens exhausting the galaxy's potential to provide new worlds for habitation and exploration. Warp space. Warp space is the medium through which faster-than-light spacecraft travel between the stars. It is, in a sense, an alternate reality, or parallel dimension, in which the laws of time and space are different from those of our own universe. Movement within warp space bears a distinct relationship to distance traveled in normal space, and this relationship can be manipulated to make faster-than-light travel possible. It is not strictly true to say that distances in warp space are shrunk compared to those of normal space. A more accurate analogy would be to think of warp space as a dense, fluid medium, which is subject to constant movement, currents, undertows, etc. This is not perceptible in warp space itself, of course, because the fluidity is only relative to our own reality. A spacecraft can exploit this phenomenon by entering warp space, allowing itself to be shifted along by its natural flow, and then re-entering normal space a distance away from the starting point. A metaphor commonly used to explain how warping works is that of the fast-flowing stream. The stream represents warp space, moving rapidly along its motionless banks, representing real space. A leaf dropped into the water upstream will move along, floating on the surface of the water. The leaf does not move relative to the water, but is merely carried by it until it lodges at some point downstream from its original location. This is a useful metaphor as far as it goes, but it must be remembered warp space is far more complex in its movements than the linear stream, for it can move in all sorts of convoluted and bewildering patterns. Spacecraft are also able to make corrective movements in warp space, and can enter or leave warp space at a chosen moment. Even so, warp travel is never totally predictable, either in its duration or eventual destination. Warp space is closely linked to psychic phenomena. There is a school of thought which believes psychic powers to be an ability to tap energy from warp space. According to this theory, a psyker has a mental or spiritual link with a point or points in warp space. If this is true, then it explains how many psychically aware creatures are able to home in on psychic vibrations, or even traverse warp space itself in some cases. Certainly, the relationship between the two kinds of space is a complex one, and is not fully understood. Warp drives. A warp drive, or warp engine, is a device that enables a spacecraft to enter and leave the medium of warp space. Warp drives incorporate their own navigational units, able to briefly glimpse into warp space in order to observe its current movements. From these movements, it is possible to calculate a course, any corrective maneuvers that may have to be made whilst in warp space, and the moment to return to real space. The distance traveled in this way is called a jump, and a jump may be of 1 to 4 light years, depending on the conditions prevalent in warp space. Such a journey typically takes between 1 and 6 days of real space time, contracted into 1 to 4 hours of perceived time for the spacecraft. A spacecraft plunged into warp space at random will travel at 1 to 4 light years per hour of perceived time per 36 hours of real space time. Whilst in warp space, a craft is isolated from real space. However, psychics are able to maintain or establish telepathic contact if they are sufficiently strong. if they are human astropaths, for example. It is dangerous for spacecraft to leave warp space close to the proximity of stars. The mass of a solar body possesses a comparable mass in warp space and acts as an irresistible attractive force to bodies near it. This makes it almost impossible to leave or re-enter normal space within a solar system without being drawn inside the sun itself. Even with the utmost care, occasional accidents do happen, and this is one of the constant dangers of warp travel. The usual practice is to aim on breaking warp space well outside a solar system and complete a journey using conventional space drives. Warp gates. A warp gate is a point in real space, which is linked to another point in real space by a tunnel through warp space. The tunnel somehow avoids the normal disturbances of warp space, allowing a journey to be made within a fixed time and in perfect safety. The existence of warp gates represents something of a mystery. Are they a natural feature or artificial? If artificial, who or what created them and for what purpose? Some warp gates have certainly been artificially enhanced because their entrances are delineated by mechanical constructions whose exact function can only be guessed at. Other warp gates are mere black holes in space. Warp gates occur in different sizes. They occur in the depths of space, at the boundaries of solar systems, within solar systems, and even on planets. The largest are easily big enough to permit the passage of spacecraft, and are usually situated at the edge of a solar system, or amongst its outer planets. Other gates are only large enough to permit the passage of small vehicles, or perhaps human-sized creatures. These occur mostly on planet surfaces, and lead directly to other gates on the surfaces of other planets. All gates are rare, the smaller types extremely so. Planetary gates are often disguised, or respond only to electrical, psychic, or other signals, which would seem to indicate a certain amount of intended secrecy on the part of their builders. All space-going races are prepared to utilize warp gates when they find them, although discovering where they lead can often be hazardous. Many gates appear to be defective and can dump a ship randomly into warp space. Others can lead to places which may once have been stars or planets, but which are now no more than empty tracts of space. The possibility of emerging into a distant, hostile alien star empire also has to be considered. It may be that craft vanishing into warp space have been transported beyond the galaxy itself. Warp gates have the disadvantage of being predetermined, permitting travel only within a fixed lane. They are also quite slow, taking... Well now, I'm not sure. It says taking 2d4 hours of perceived time and 2d6 days of real time to traverse distances of up to 4 light years. So I guess you're supposed to roll dice to determine how long things take. Most warp gates appear to be within the region of 20 to 30 light years apart. Warp portals. The term warp portal is often coined to differentiate these warp space, real space interfaces from warp gates. A warp portal is simply an entrance into and exit from warp space. It does not lead to a tunnel, and a spacecraft entering a portal is cast to the chance currents of warp space. With careful maneuvering, it may be possible to re-enter normal space using the same portal from the other side. Again, the exact nature of the portals is not understood. Are they mere accidents or natural occurrences, or have they some secret purpose? Some aliens use warp portals to travel between warp space to real space, specifically the creatures known as enslavers, which live within warp space itself. Like warp gates, portals occur in all sizes and places, and may appear on a planet's surface. Some have a definite physical constituent, whilst others are invisible, or a mere hole in the ground. Warp portals do have their use, for there are many recorded instances of spacecraft with damaged warp drives, trapped inside warp space and doomed to destruction, suddenly locating a warp portal, enabling them to return to real space. Warp creatures. It has already been mentioned that the creatures known as enslavers actually live in warp space. Enslavers are not alone in this, and many other creatures appear to have their natural homes in warp space. Some creatures seem comfortable in either type of space, or have limited abilities to transcend both. The linking factor between the two sorts of realities seems to be psychic. The creatures of warp space are closely associated with psychic power. Many of them actually feed on psychic energy, or the natural life energy of living creatures, or are drawn to feed by emissions of such energy. All these creatures are a threat to the races of the galaxy, but especially to humans. Humans are not a developed psychic race. The Slan and Eldar are more likely to have psychic powers. However, humanity is undergoing a serious evolutionary change into a far more psychically capable race, and so the incidence of these powers is becoming increasingly common. To date, humans lack the ability to properly control their powers, especially as they are first developed in early adulthood. This causes profound, localized psychic disturbances, far greater than anything associated with a fully mature human psyker or any psychic alien. These disturbances attract psychically attuned warp creatures, like moths to a candle, except that these moths are often deadly carnivores, soul feeders, and highly dangerous. Using the psychic link established by the emergent psyker, many aliens are able to open up temporary warp portals and push their way into the real universe. Others are simply drawn against their will, but still cause problems once they are in real space. Warp storms. Warp space is an extremely volatile medium, and can represent a dangerous one for spacecraft within it. Occasionally, the normal current movements of warp space become amplified into raging storms of savage and destructive ferocity. Such storms may last for only a few moments, or they may last for many years. At best, a warp storm might throw a ship off course or delay it. At worst, a warp storm can make warp travel impossible in some parts of the galaxy. Storms are constantly forming and dying down, and at any time, at least 10% of the galaxy's solar systems will be inaccessible because of storms. Half of these systems are cut off for less than a year, but many remain isolated for many years, or even centuries. Indeed, some systems have always been isolated and show no sign of becoming otherwise. The Human Navigator. Unlike the closely packed empires of other races, the Imperium is flung wide across the entire galaxy. Its worlds are often hundreds, if not thousands, of light years distant. Normally, it would be impossible to maintain such a vast area of space as a single political entity. What makes it possible to do so is the existence of human navigators. Navigators are a subspecies of humanity, some of whom resemble humans so closely that they are indistinguishable. Others are so physically alien that the relationship is hardly apparent. All navigators are capable of entering a trance-like dream state, in which they are able to mentally steer a spacecraft through the medium of warp space. Under the intuitive guidance of the navigator, a ship is able to traverse distances of tens of thousands of light years in a single jump. Perceived journey time is 1 to 4 days per 1,000 light years, equivalent to 1 to 6 months of real time. Even so, a journey from one edge of the galaxy to the other would take between 85 and 510 months of real time. For these reasons, worlds remain self-governing, even within the Imperium. The Astronomicon. In order to guide their spacecraft through warp space, navigators require a signal to steer by, a sort of real space reference point which can be perceived from warp space. As only psychic signals penetrate both real and warp space, this signal has to be a psychic one. Some psychics are capable of broadcasting a short-range signal of this type, up to 10 light years, but the principal signal is centered upon Earth and is called the Astronomicon. Further details about the Astronomicon and the psychers who maintain it, the Adeptus Astronomica, are discussed later. For the moment, it is only important to bear in mind that the Astronomicon permits navigators to utilize their powers. The range of the Astronomicon is far greater than 10 light years, although it is not infinite. Warp storm activity can also affect the total range, but about 50,000 light years is the usual distance. As the galaxy has a diameter of about 85,000 light years, with Earth approximately 30,000 light years from the center in the galactic west. This means that the Astronomicon does not cover the eastern fringe of the galaxy at all. The Astronomicon marks the effective boundaries of human space. Human groups existing beyond it are rare, isolated, and comprise an unknown quantity. Humanity and the Imperium. The purpose of this section is to introduce the reader to the general history and organization of the Imperium. In all the galaxy, the Imperium is the most powerful and influential political entity. Even the most prolific of alien races cannot compare in sheer numbers with the mass of humanity. Nor can any single alien race be said to wield even a fraction of the power available to mankind. Each of the organizations, factions, and subraces mentioned here are described fully later. The Imberium. Over 10,000 years ago, the great emperor of mankind ascended to the golden throne of Earth. Of the wars he waged to get there, of the countless agonies of battling worlds, there is no record. Only the emperor remembers, if indeed that strange and ancient creature can recall those distant times. The ascent of the Emperor marked the end of a long era of human history, an age typified by interhuman warfare and a gradual decline of the accumulated knowledge of millennia. This was the age of strife. The high point of scientific achievement had occurred thousands of years before, in the yet older age now known as the Dark Age of Technology. Through the Dark Age of Technology and the Age of Strife, mankind has come to the present age, that of the Imperium. In many respects, it is a time of superstition in which a great and unfathomable technology has been enslaved to the forces of mysticism and madness. To the ordinary humans of these times, the peasants in the fields and the warriors amongst the stars, scientific thought represents an abhorrent perversity, a corruption of honor and religious virtue. Even to those few humans who deal with the material of technology, the science and the magic have become largely inseparable. The warp engine must have runes upon its side. The laser gun requires the blessings of the gods of battle. This is a universe in which the gods, mysticism, and magic are real. For this is a time of great change within humanity itself, a time when more and more humans are developing powers, and a vision far beyond those of their ancestors. Humans developing these abilities are known as psychics or psychers, and by many less flattering names, the most common being that of witch. Psychers are men and women who have the ability to transcend the normal laws of space, placing them in touch with great universal forces which lie far beyond the understanding of their kin. Their gifts defy explanation: telepathy, telekinesis, illusion, and countless others. Many ordinary humans attribute these powers to a divine origin. Some psychers claim their powers enable them to tap forces which lie under the control of entities existing outside of the real universe, beyond normal time and space. Others seek a rational explanation for these phenomena, but this is not a rational age. And they are few, and their voice is weak. Well, so far, this is really cool. This is far cooler than contemporary 40K lore, in my opinion. I am all for mystery. I love mystery, especially when it comes to ancient technology. There's something lost when a franchise, speaking about things like 40K, exists for too long and is forced to explore things that were otherwise mysterious early on. This is wonderful. I love this. I hope you guys enjoyed it even half as much as I did. This makes me want to play 40K. It makes me want to pick up first edition somehow, because this is incredible. ways. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Both of those things really help the channel out. And I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.